To round 431 to two significant figures, we're going to look at the second place value column along. So that would be not the hundreds, but the tens column. And we need to round this to the nearest 10. 431 to the nearest 10 would be 430. So that's to two significant figures. To round this to three significant figures, what we have to do is round it to the third place value column along. In this case, that's the units column. Rounding that to the nearest whole number, well, that's already a whole number, so it just stays the same. That's 431 to three significant figures. Part B has the number 627.7. Rounding that to two significant figures means rounding it to the second place value column along, that's the tens column. 627.7 to the nearest 10 would be 630. So that's to two significant figures. Rounding this to three significant figures means rounding it to the third place value column along, and that is the units column in this case. So rounding that to the nearest whole number is 628. In part C, we need to round 1,353 to two and three significant figures. To two significant figures, what we're going to do is round it to the nearest 100. That is the second biggest place value column along. To the nearest 100, that is 1,400. To three significant figures, what we need to do is round it to the third place value column along. And in this case, that is the tens column. To the nearest 10, that number there is 1,350. In part D, we're now rounding 5,208. To two significant figures, we're rounding that to the nearest 100. That's the second biggest place value column along. To the nearest 100, that is simply 5,200. Now, to round this to three significant figures, we need to be really careful. The third place value column along is the tens column. Now, it's got a 0 in there, but it still counts. We just need to round this to the nearest 10, which means we would get 5,210. Remember, to round it to the nearest 10, what you need to do is check the units column and see if you've got a 5 or greater. And because we do, we need to round up. So this would be 5,210 to three significant figures. If you're wondering why we don't ignore that 0, just be really, really careful. We only ignore zeros for significant figures when they are at the beginning of a number. And that happens when you have decimals that begin 0 point something. So in those cases, you are ignoring the zeros until you get to a place value column that actually has something other than a 0 in it. In this case, we've already had something in the thousands column. So from this point on, all the place value columns count towards our number. So if we were rounding this to one significant figure, we would round it to the nearest 1,000. To two significant figures, we'd round it to the nearest 100, which is what we did here. And to round it to three significant figures, we would round it to the nearest 10, which is what we've done there. In question E, we are now rounding 9,008. To two significant figures, that means rounding to the nearest 100. That's our second biggest place value column. Rounding this to the nearest 100 is simply 9,000. To three significant figures now, we want to round this to the nearest 10. Remember, 1, 2, 3. Our third place value column here is the tens column. To the nearest 10, that would be 9,010. In question F, we've got 0.1001. Now in this case, we ignore that place value column. It's not our biggest place value column because there's nothing in it. Our biggest place value column is this one, the tenths column. But we want to round to two significant figures, so we don't go to the first, we go to the second. And this is the one that we round to. So we want to round to the nearest hundredth or to two decimal places. Now remember, as soon as we've got a valid place value column, we can then carry on counting. We don't ignore these zeros here. So to two significant figures, we are effectively rounding to 2 decimal places for this number. And that means we get 0.10. To round it to 3 significant figures, we're going to round this number to 3 decimal places. And rounding it to 3 decimal places means we need to check the 4th digit along, and that's only a 1. So we round down. So this number would be 0.100 to 3 significant figures. Remember, to be comfortable with doing this, you first need to be comfortable rounding to a given number of decimal places. If you're not sure about that, go back to the video for part 1 of this lesson. In question G, we're rounding 8.392. To 2 significant figures, we are going to round to the 2nd place value column along, and that is the 10ths column, so effectively to 1 decimal place. To 1 decimal place, this would be 8.4. So 8.392 is 8.4 to 2 significant figures. To 3 significant figures, what we want to do is round to the 3rd place value column along, so that is to the nearest 100th, or to 2 decimal places effectively, and that would be 8.39. In question H, we need to round 4.5555 to 2 and 3 significant figures. To 2 significant figures, what we want to do is round it to the nearest 10th. That's our 2nd place value column along. That gives us 4.6. To round it to 3 significant figures, what we want to do is round the number to the nearest 100th. That's our 3rd place value column. In other words, we want to round to 2 decimal places this time. So that would be 4.56. Remember, rounding to 2 decimal places means we need to check the next digit along. And because that's a 5, we need to round up. So 4.56 to 3 significant figures. In question I, we are rounding 0.003457. Let's look for the biggest place value column. It is this one, the thousandths column, because everything before it is just a 0. So the 2nd biggest place value column is going to be this column, the 10,000ths column. So to round to 2 significant figures for this number, it's effectively the same as rounding to 4 decimal places. We've got to get that far down the number. Now, to round to 4 decimal places, what you want to do is check the next number along, and because that's a 5, we need to round up. So this would become 0.0035 to 4 decimal places, or 2 significant figures in this case. To 3 significant figures, what we want to do is round to this many decimal places. That's our 3rd significant figure. Our biggest place value column, the 2nd and the 3rd. To decide whether to round up or down, we look at the next digit along, and because that's a 7, we need to round this one here up. So we would get 0.00346 to 3 significant figures. Here we've got 17,049.99. To round this to 2 significant figures, we need to round it to the nearest 1,000. Our biggest place value column here is the 10,000s column, so the 2nd biggest one is the thousands column. Rounding this to the nearest 1,000 just gives us 17,000. Rounding that number to 3 significant figures now means we need to round to the nearest 100. Now, looking at the hundreds column, do we need to round up or down? Well, you've got to check the next one along, and because that's only a 4, we're going to round down, and it works out as 17,000 as well. So just be really careful. You might have noticed that in most of the examples so far, when you were rounding to 2 significant figures, you always had 2 non-zero digits in your answer. And when you were rounding to 3 significant figures, you actually had 3 non-zero digits. In this case, we've only got 2, and that can sometimes happen. number of non-zero digits you have can't be more than the number of significant figures you're rounding to, but it could be less. So that's just something to take a little bit of care on.